I'm reading How to Speak Dragonese. And I'm back in my shed, but I'm going to have to read quite quietly because can you see I have somebody asleep on the bed behind me. That's my dog, Pigeon. Okay, so chapter 5. Remember, poor old Hiccup has sort of lost Toothless because Toothless got captured by the Roman dragon rustlers. So it's a bad moment. By the time the hopeful puffin had stopped turning round in circles, the fog had started to lift a little. Half an hour later, the mist had vanished entirely, and they could see for miles in every direction. The Roman ship was nowhere to be seen. The water was as cold as ice again, so there was no further danger of bumping into any shark worms. They had not gone as far off course as Hiccup had thought. They set off towards the distant silhouette of Berk to the north. Fishlegs took the rudder because Hiccup was too depressed to do anything. Hiccup sat staring at his half of How to Speak Dragonese. Poor Hiccup lost his Toothless. All that work, all that time spent dragon watching at the wild dragon cliff ripped in two. He was trying not to think of what might be happening to Toothless on board that Roman ship. Toothless hated the idea of being trapped so much Hiccup even had to leave the door open when they went to bed. And now there he was, most likely locked up in that horrible cave. Oh, look, poor Hiccup is really unhappy. Thinking about poor Toothless. We just had an argument too, thought Hiccup in total misery, and he flew to our rescue. And now I might never see him again. Cow finally woke up from her deep sleep. "Did you get that helmet?" she warned. "Not exactly," replied Fishlegs grimly. "It's a long story." In her strange, spinning, zigzagging fashion, the hopeful puffin drew nearer to the little Isle of Berk. The Isle of Berk has been home to the hooligan tribes for so long as to seem like forever. It is one of the the smallest inhabited islands in the barbaric archipelago, and perhaps the best way to describe it is wet. There are 28 words for rain in the hooligan language, and that tells you something. And Berk is the kind of place where the sea is always wandering up onto the land. Even at the highest point, you can find scallop shells and dolphins' bones thrown up by some gigantic tide or storm. So what with the rain pouring down constantly from above and the sea sneaking up from below, the hooligans spent most of their lives up to their knees in muddy salt water. As they got nearer to Berk, they didn't have time to feel sorry for themselves. The hopeful puffin was in difficulties. Never a very seaworthy boat, she had taken 2 big knocks. First when she was rammed by Stoick's boat Sparrowhawk, then when Hiccup jumped down onto her decks from the Roman ship. She was taking on water even faster than normal. Despite Hiccup and Fishlegs bailing out the water as quickly as they could with their helmets, by the time they reached Hooligan Harbour, she sank entirely. They had to swim the last 100 metres, Hiccup holding Fishlegs up, because, unusually for a Viking, Fishlegs had never quite mastered the doggy paddle. Oh, poor Fishlegs. To make matters worse, Gobber was standing on the harbour wall watching them come up, arms folded, brows as low as Thor's thundercloud. Oh, he's annoyed. When the hopeful puffin disappeared beneath the water, he looked as if he might explode. "It hasn't been a very successful day, has it?" moaned Fishlegs as they struggled out of the sea and onto the rocks. "At least we didn't meet any shark worms after all." Gobber was not amused. That picture. "I'm not sure there ever were any shark worms," said Hiccup through gritted teeth. He looked back sadly at the 3 circles of ripped nipples and bubbles that were all that remained of the hopeful puffin. She'd never been the most beautiful of boats, but to him she was the best. Slipping and sliding on the seaweedy rocks, they clambered reluctantly towards Gobber and stood before him, soaking wet heads bows. Fishlegs timidly offered him the Roman helmet. Gobber was not amused. "What?" he bellowed, pointing furiously at the Roman helmet. "What in the name of Woden is that?" "A Roman helmet, sir," admitted Fishlegs. "We sort of accidentally boarded a Roman ship by mistake. We got lost, you see, sir." "You got lost?" boomed Gobber, not believing his ears. "Vikings don't get lost. How could you possibly board a Roman ship by mistake? A Roman ship doesn't look anything like a peaceable fishing boat." "Yes, I know, sir, stammered Fishlegs, but we thought there were these shark worms, you see." "And where?" Gobber interrupted Fishlegs, his voice dangerously calm. Where is your boat? Ah, yes, well, said Fishlegs miserably. The boat sort of sank, sir. The boat sort of sank, roared Gobber. You call yourselves Vikings and you sort of sink your own boat on a perfectly calm day 200 metres from your own island? I mean, what kind of hooligans are you anyway? You can't build boats, you can't train dragons, Fishlegs here can't even swim. Salt water brings out my eczema, mumbled Fishlegs. You're supposed to be a pirate, howled Gobber. As it is, you're the most useless, miserable, pathetic excuses for tadpole poos I've ever met in my entire life. I am lost for words. Despite being lost for words, Gobber yelled at them for the next 10 minutes, telling them that they were a disgrace to their tribe and the worst recruits he had ever had. He put them on limpet rations for the next 3 weeks and said the next time anything like this happened, they would be expelled from the programme. At home, it wasn't much better. During supper, Hiccup explained to his father about the unfortunate accident of boarding the Roman galley by mistake, and about the kidnapping of Toothless, and how the prefect had got hold of half of how to speak Dragonese, and how Stoick really should send a war party to rescue Toothless in the book. Hiccup showed the sad remains of how to speak Dragonese in the Roman helmet to his father to prove his story was genuine. Said Stoick thoughtfully. Stoick was a great giant of a man with enough red haystacky beard and barrel's belly to get out at least 2 decent-sized Viking chieftains. He wasn't really concentrating because he was reading Hiccup's pirate training report, which was the worst report he had ever read. Thumbnails of Thor, he was thinking. How can anybody get -4 for advanced rudery? And nothing at all for beginner burping. And hammer-throwing studies, which had been Stoick's favourite subjects when he was a boy. Stoick was trying very hard not to feel disappointed in his son. He kept telling himself that Hiccup was just a slow developer and would soon start getting muscles and nose hair and scoring the winning goal in Bashibuggle's games like Stoick had himself. But what was he doing? Earning reports like Hiccup is the worst sailor I've taught in 20 years. How could he have come back from a perfectly straightforward training exercise having misplaced both his dragon and his boat? I mean, and how could he possibly have got lost and accidentally boarded a Roman ship rather than a peaceable fishing boat? Vikings didn't get lost. Stoick opened his mouth to bellow at his son, and then he closed it again. Small, skinny, freckled, and unsatisfactory. Hiccup's worried face looked up at him. He was clearly desperately anxious about that laughably tiny dragon of his. Stoick didn't have the heart to be angry. He crumpled up the report in one gigantic fist. Okay, so this is the report. I don't know how to put my glasses on to see the book. Yes, the report. Beginner burping. Hiccup cannot get up the necessary wind to do well in this subject. It says, frightening foreigners must stop speaking in impeccable French and work on his yelling. Oh dear, 1 out of 10, says Gobber. Advanced rudery. Oh dear, -4 out of 10. I don't know what happened there. Hiccup's too polite. So you can see, yes, it's a really bad report, basically. Dear, oh dear. Oh, except for sword fighting lessons. Ah, because remembering how to be a pirate, he was actually really rather good at sword fighting. Quick reflexes. Fancy footwork. I'm impressed. 9 out of 10 for that one. So he's good at something. Stoick the past reading Hiccup's report. Son, he said gently and gravely, I'm sorry you have lost Ruthless. Toothless, Hiccup interrupted indignantly. He's called Toothless. Toothless, Stoick corrected himself hurriedly, but I am about to tell you something very important. Stoick took Hiccup by the shoulders and looked him in the eyes. You, he said solemnly, are the son of a chief. You have lost your pet, but you must be brave. You must be a man about it. There will be other dragons. Not like Toothless, objected Hiccup in distress. That dragon trusted me, and I let him down. Silence, said Stoick sternly. What does a chief feel, son? A chief feels no pain, replied Hiccup obediently. But father, Stoick was just getting into his stride.
A chief feels no pain. A chief feels no fear. A chief must be above mere personal feelings. There is no question of putting together a war party to rescue your dragon. Oh, poor Hiccup. It will be a waste of our warriors' time. The Romans are probably halfway back to Rome by now, and they'll have turned Eustace into a handbag. Oh dear, I don't think this is going to be very comforting. Toothless, corrected Hiccup again. And that's what I'm telling you, Father. I overheard them talking. I think they weren't just passing through. Talking? roared Stoick, his eyebrows lowering. What do you mean talking? How did you understand these Romans? Ah, admitted Hiccup. Well, old Brinkley's been teaching me some Latin, you see. Latin! Latin! Stoick exploded. He crashed his fist so hard on the table that the oysters they'd been tucking into did a couple of cartwheels. In this air, my son has been speaking Latin. He controlled himself with an effort. Hooligans do not, I repeat, do not speak Latin. What are they teaching you in your fighting foreigners lessons? When a hooligan meets a foreigner, he shouts at the foreigner loudly and slowly. That is the only language a foreigner understands. Hooligans don't talk to dragons either, or write books about them. You're spending far too much time scribbling about dragons and not enough time preparing to become a chief. Dirk took the half of How to Speak Dragonese out of Hiccup's hands and threw it on the fire. Hiccup gasped. That book had everything he'd ever learned about dragons in it. How would he ever talk to dragons again without it? Stoick stomped off. And as soon as he was out of sight, Hiccup burned his fingers, pulling the book out of the flames. Luckily, it was still quite damp and the edges were only very slightly burnt. On that night, for the first time in a long, long while, Hiccup had to go to bed without the company of toothless poor Hiccup. The little dragon with a small, wriggling, snoring hot water bottle. Now Hiccup lay awake till the hours of the morning, shivering uncontrollably under the thin covers, his feet and hands as cold as the North Pole, his ears trembling in the icy draught. And when eventually he slipped in and out of a feverish sleep, the night dragons and the wind and the wolves seemed to be howling all together. You've lost Toothless, lost him forever, lost Toothless, lost him forever and ever, over and over and over.